The cameras were already rolling when the Senate Budget Committee came to order, beaming a live stream into over 40 million homes. It was supposed to be another hearing most people would ignore, another day of dry charts and hollow speeches. But inside the chamber, something was different. The room, carved in polished wood and lined with silent rows of lawmakers, felt more like a courtroom waiting for a verdict than a meeting on budgets. There was no noise, but there was weight, the kind of stillness that knows something real is about to happen. The topic on paper seemed dull, the financial flow between red and blue states. Who gives? Who takes? Who carries the load? But beneath that headline was a story that touched almost every American: where their money goes, and who decides how it's used. That tension sat quietly in the corners of the room, waiting for someone to pull it into the light. Senator JD Vance sat like he owned the air. His posture was loose, but his eyes were sharp. He leaned into his mic with the ease of someone who had rehearsed the line over and over until it felt like truth. And then he said it. Calm, steady, just loud, enough to sting. California lives off the kindness of Mississippi. For a moment, silence. Then a low roll of laughter crept across the Republican side. A few chuckled. One slapped the table. Another leaned back, shaking his head with a grin. They weren't just laughing at the line. They were laughing at the idea that millions of people, entire states, were being called freeloaders in a single breath. And they loved it. But not everyone laughed. On the other side of the room, Jasmine Crockett sat still. Not frozen, focused. No raised eyebrow, no tight-lipped smile. Just a quiet stillness that said she was listening. In front of her sat a red folder worn at the edges, marked with thick tabs. It didn't shine. It didn't need to. It looked used, like something someone brings when they've done their homework and they're ready. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. Her eyes locked on Vance's, not with anger, but with something heavier, precision. And when she finally opened her mouth, it wasn't a shout. It was a cut kindness, she said slowly, as if tasting the word, or is it theft buried? Under tax loopholes, that sentence didn't echo. It thudded. Hard, the room went quiet again, but this time not out of boredom, out of sudden, sharp attention. Whatever this hearing had been expected to be, it had now turned into something else, and that red folder. It was about to change everything the moment JD Vance clicked his mic and leaned forward. The room tensed again. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Calmly, with a steady tone, he signaled an aide. The screen behind him blinked to life. A series of bright, clean bar graphs appeared, each one color-coded by state. It looked official, polished, almost too perfect. Vance's voice sliced through the silence like a blade. Let's not twist reality. The data doesn't lie. He paused long enough for the screen to do the talking. Green bars rose tall over states like Mississippi, Alabama, and Kentucky. Blue states, on the other hand, California, new. York's Illinois showed smaller, shorter bars. The chart was slick and easy to read. And the message it carried was simple. Red states give, blue states take. This is arithmetic, Vance said, his smile returning. My people pay. Yours take. There it was. A sentence wrapped in numbers, but meant to shame. It wasn't just data. It was a setup, a carefully staged trap. The kind that reduces millions of working people into a punchline. But Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She didn't scramble. She didn't protest. She stood slowly, picked up a small silver USB from her bag, and walked across the marble floor to the AV console. No drama, no noise. Just the sound of her heels, 3 quiet clicks, and the steady breath of a woman who knew what she was about to do. She plugged it in. The screen cut to black. Then it came back. New map, New numbers, new truth. This time, the screen wasn't about what people got. It was about what they gave. A map of the United States lit up by economic output, GDP, federal taxes paid, jobs created. It wasn't a flashy animation. It didn't need to be. California glowed gold. So did New York, Washington, Massachusetts. Illinois, these weren't welfare states. These were engines. Crockett returned to her seat without a word. She didn't need to explain. The map spoke louder than any speech. These states weren't living off anyone. They were keeping the country afloat. But Vance wasn't done. He leaned forward again, this time with a little more bite in his tone. "Your district," he said, locking eyes with Crockett. "What? Does it live on, if not the taxes my voters pay?" It wasn't a question. It was a knife hidden in a smile. A hit meant to humiliate. He turned to the press gallery, slow and smug, as if to say, "Game over." Crockett stayed still. Then, without flinching, she answered, "Your state isn't surviving." She said every syllable sharp. "It's siphoning." The room froze again. And just like that, the air changed. What followed wasn't yelling. It wasn't chaos. It was war, not with fists or volume, but with data. Vance threw out polished talking points about coastal elites and billionaire donors. Crockett countered with cold facts. Job creation rates, infrastructure investment. How red states received more in federal dollars than they contributed. She wasn't raising her voice. She didn't have to. Every line she spoke landed like a nail, slow, solid, and impossible to pull out. The battle stopped being about policy. It became personal, but not just for the two of them. Outside the chamber, something strange started happening. Someone clipped a 10-second moment, Crockett's line about siphoning, and posted it on TikTok. A college kid added subtitles. Another user reposted it with the caption, "She said it." The clip hit Twitter, then Reddit, then Instagram. In less than 30 minutes, the hearing went from a silent broadcast on C-SPAN to a live-fire political moment being watched by millions. In one classroom, a teacher played the clip between lessons. In a hospital break room, a nurse passed it to a coworker. In a diner in Kentucky, a retired veteran said out loud to no one in particular, "She's not wrong." What started as a controlled, calculated hit job by JD Vance was unraveling. He had tried to frame the narrative, red states as the givers, blue states as the needy. But Crockett had pulled the curtain back, and behind it was a truth too big to ignore, one written not in spin, but in the numbers the government itself had collected. And while the debate raged on inside that chamber, outside, something bigger had already begun. Millions were watching, and they weren't just listening. They were remembering. The moment Jasmine Crockett opened her red folder, the entire chamber seemed to lean in without meaning to. It had been sitting on her desk the whole time, worn, tabbed, quiet. But now, it wasn't just a folder. It was a weapon. She didn't raise it in the air. She didn't announce anything. She simply pulled out a single report, slid it toward the clerk, and nodded. The screen behind her blinked. Then the numbers came alive. 2 storms. 2 disasters, side by side. One labeled Hurricane Harvey, Texas, 2017. The other, Hurricane Irma, Florida, 2017. The figures beneath them weren't hard to follow. Texas had taken twice the damage. More than 300,000 structures destroyed. Over 100 lives lost. But the aid, less than half of what Florida received. There was no angry music, no flashing lights, just federal numbers on a government screen. Cold, clear, undeniable. The words beneath the bar graph said it all. Texas received 50.2% of Florida's aid, despite 162% greater damage. No one spoke. No one laughed. Not this time. Crockett stood still, eyes on the screen. She didn't yell. Her voice was soft, too soft for how hard it hit. "If you fund my state," she said, "then where were you when we needed a hand?" It wasn't a question. It was a wound, a die, and it cut through everything. The hearing didn't. Erupt, it collapsed into silence. A kind that felt heavier than noise. The kind that says something landed exactly where it was supposed to. JD Vance blinked. Just once, his posture stiffened. He reached toward a binder, like a drowning man grabbing for a rock. Then, with the smallest hint of a smirk, he tapped his mic. "I came prepared to," he said. He pulled out a printed memo, stamped quietly, with a government seal. No charts, just lines of black and white. "Texas counties have requested increased federal aid," he read aloud. Then he looked up. "I call that textbook hypocrisy." He leaned back in his chair, satisfied, like he'd just flipped the story back on her. But Crockett didn't take the bait. She didn't rush to reply. She waited. Let the words settle. Then said simply, "You just proved my point." There was no raise in pitch. No dramatic pause. Just the next line, as cold and direct as water to the face. "You starve us, then mock us when we ask for water." A quiet gasp came from the press row. One reporter lowered his phone. Someone near the back shifted uncomfortably. That sentence didn't hit like a punch. It landed like guilt. The screen behind her changed again. This time, it wasn't about disasters. It was about the country's core math. A graph filled the display to columns. On the left, states marked in red: Alabama, Mississippi, Kentucky, West Virginia. Their bars were tall, each labeled 125% return, 138%, 152%. For every dollar they sent to the federal government, they got more than $1 back. On the right, blue states, California, New York, Illinois. Their bars were smaller, labeled 84%, 89%, 93%, meaning they gave more than they got. Crockett turned slightly. She didn't point, she didn't narrate. She let the numbers speak. Then she said the words that would leave the room, the internet, and the news cycle shaken. "We don't eat from your hand. We get handed debt." Her voice didn't rise. She didn't seek the camera, but the sentence hit so hard it felt like it echoed. Not just in the room, but across every screen watching. A Republican senator halfway down the bench rubbed his eyes. Another scribbled something into a notepad he'd barely touched all morning. No one from Vance's side interrupted. They couldn't. Because this wasn't opinion anymore. It was math. On screen. On record. In front of the world, outside the chamber. Twitter lit up. YouTube view counts surged. TikTok exploded with stitched videos, news breakdowns, and slow zooms on Crockett's face. Memes didn't mock her. They quoted her. "You starve us, then mock us when we ask for water. We don't eat from your hand. We get handed debt." No one cared what party you belonged to anymore. The data had made it past the noise. Inside the hearing room, JD Vance stayed seated. His notes sat in front of him, but he didn't touch them. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't leaning back. He was staring, not at Crockett, not at the room, but at the screen that had just told a different story than the one he had tried to sell. And Jasmine Crockett. She didn't gloat. She didn't raise an eyebrow. She just stood with quiet, steady breath. Not victorious. Just undeniable. The climax had come, not with shouting, not with anger, but with a truth no one could look away from. The hearing didn't end with applause. It ended with a silence no one dared to break. The final chart still glowed on the screen. 2 plain columns, each one backed by hard government numbers. On the left, 5 blue states: California, New York, Massachusetts, Illinois. Washington listed with trillion-dollar tax contributions. On the right, 5 red states, Kentucky, Mississippi, West Virginia, Alabama, Arkansas, shown. As top aid receivers, no colors to stir emotion. No fancy animation. Just the truth, standing naked in the room. JD Vance didn't move. He sat back in his chair, eyes fixed on the data. His usual confidence was gone. No more sharp questions. No more smirks. He looked like a man who'd run out of ways to spin. Because what was left to say when your own government numbers point the other way? Behind the scenes, panic spread faster than sound. Some conservative news outlets, Newsmax, OAN, quickly cut their live feeds. They didn't explain. They just switched to backup footage or generic headlines. Fox hesitated, then quietly transitioned to a pre-scheduled segment. It wasn't about timing. It was about control. The hearing had gone off script, and no one in the spin room had a plan for what to do when the facts spoke louder than the talking points. But outside the Capitol, the people were already ahead of them. The clip hit social media like a spark. In dry grass. One moment it was Crockett calmly saying, "We don't beg. We get robbed." The next, that line was everywhere. Nurses posted it next to photos of their crowded ERs. Janitors shared it beside pay stubs that couldn't cover rent. A teacher in Georgia wrote it across a picture of a broken heater in a classroom full of winter coats. Veterans reposted it with no caption at all, just silence. And perhaps most surprising, even voices from deep red districts, small towns, truck stops, retired coal workers started commenting one simple sentence: "She's not wrong." That was the shift no one saw coming. The usual divide started to blur. Because Crockett hadn't just exposed a lie, she had spoken a truth that lived in people's daily lives. And the line stuck because it didn't sound political. It sounded personal. Soon, it wasn't just people. It was power. In New York and California, CEOs who normally stayed quiet about politics began reposting the final chart with blunt captions. One read, "We're tired of footing the bill and being called freeloaders." Even Wall Street firms, usually allergic to controversy, issued carefully worded statements praising the clarity of Crockett's data. In Silicon Valley, tech leaders called her a voice that had put the facts where the noise used to live. And in Washington, a few Republican senators quietly walked back their earlier comments. One even requested his statement be removed from the hearing record. The tide was shifting, not in secret, but in public. As cameras turned back to the front of the chamber, Crockett remained still. She didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She just looked forward, her fingers resting on the now closed red folder like it was never meant to be a weapon. Just the truth, waiting to be read. Then she said it. Fairness begins with the truth. That was all. No extra words. No spin. Just the line that closed the circle. And just like that, the screen froze on the final image, those 2 columns standing quietly like a verdict no one wanted to hear. There was no applause, no cheering. Not because it wasn't deserved, but because everyone knew something had. Just ended the illusion that red states carry blue ones. The story told over and over again to distract from the math. JD Vance shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his face still, but not calm. His eyes locked not on Crockett, but on the numbers. The numbers that didn't care who was speaking, only who was right. And in that final moment, the hearing didn't conclude. It reckoned.